Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you compilations from my previous seasons. Seasons 6, 7, and 8 make up the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls, and this is episode 64. The title of this episode is We Didn't Start the Fire? Why Blockchain's Evolution is Far More Important Than Greedy Bankers and Crooked Politicians Making a Quick Buck for Themselves at Your Expense. This podcast compilation is made up of 5 clips from 5 Crypto Hipster podcasts, 1 from season 6, 2 from season 7, and 2 from season 8. All of my podcasts are available on the Crypto Hipster podcast station on Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And I had 5 amazing conversations. Let's talk about who they were with. First conversation on this compilation episode was with Adam Helfgott. I spoke to him in October 2023 during season 6. He's the co-founder at Valence. He and I spoke about the importance of capturing proof of authenticity while empowering a decentralized network of networks for the Web3 world. That was a really insightful conversation. Second was, I enjoyed this one. It was with a man from the Matrix, with Estrada, who's a co-founder and CEO of the Matrix, MAITRIX. That was in March 14, 2025, during season 8. And we talked about entering the Matrix by building an economic infrastructure for decentralized AI. Third, from season 7, was in May 2024. I spoke with the co-founder and CEO of Aethos. His name is Nikhil Raghuveera. That's a mouthful. We talked about why smart contracts and data capture methods must continue to evolve. Fourth was a wonderful conversation with a former Kansas Jayhawk alum who's in an industry that we don't really talk about too much on my podcasts. We spoke was Todd Haselhorst. Todd and I spoke. He's a CEO and founder of HEALE Labs, and we talked about the logistics industry. We talked about the hero's journey, reducing fraud, waste, and theft, and transforming the logistics industry using blockchain. And fifth was an amazing conversation with the co-founder Emeritus at CoinRoutes, David Weisberger. And we talked in March 2025, and David and I spoke about why the unsolvable inefficiencies of analog traditional financial markets opens the door for digital markets to replace them and thrive in the coming years. David was from season 8. Before that, Todd was a conversation from season 7 in April 2024. Adam, season 6, Ian, season 8, and Nikhil, season 7. All these podcasts, like I said, are available on the Crypto Hipster podcast station. And together, the clips from these podcasts make up episode 64. We're going to 67. I got 3 more after this one. And the title of this one, again, is We Didn't Start the Fire? Why Blockchain's Evolution is Far More Important Than Greedy Bankers and Crooked Politicians Making a Quick Buck for Themselves at Your Expense. Thanks for checking out this episode. Thanks for tuning in. I've got a few more to go. Hope to catch you there. And after this, hope to catch you for season 10, kicking off in April. See you soon. Thank you for tuning in.
One of my concerns with data is, and you've seen this more in the social media side where people post videos on social media, they give you a clip,
Yeah.
right? But they don't give you context.
Yeah.
See happening that you might disagree with, but you don't know what the situation is or the context behind it is. So what do you see as dangerous in today's world with the use of malicious data or malicious videos or clips or even like pieces of information that are maliciously presented? How do we solve that?
Yeah, I think, I think it's like, like kind of like the architecture of what I'm talking about here, the product can be developed where, one, if a clip isn't like audited back to its source, right? There's not like a little stamp that's like a public thing, the same way SSL works. Like, you don't transact on a site that doesn't have SSL, don't like ingest this piece of content or post it if it doesn't have this like link back to where it comes from. And then what can happen is that there could be other products and things like that where, kind of what happens internally at Twitter, or did happen, I guess, I think Elon just turned it off, this like content moderation thing where, hey, if the same piece of like crazy content is being distributed by these like 700,000 accounts, we should look into that and maybe post one of those little bubbles that says this is wrong, I think a lot of that could be crowdsourced, incentive based there, with a system like this. And then if content just doesn't have a source, and then you can say, so if it's like an AI video of Biden saying something bizarre, that can get tracked back to the source that might like be a whole bunch of craziness that isn't quite real. I think where it really goes into the future, and this is what we're doing on the genomic side, is that the camera that takes that video and things like that will have a cryptographic chip in it, that will basically be signing the video it creates. And if that video gets modified or changed, like you can like figure that out really easily, in an automated way. And I think that's really what's like where it's going. That's what we have on the genomic side, is that the sequencer does have a cryptographic chip that does validate the data that's coming off of it, and that if like things change in that sequence, it doesn't hash back to reality, and it's thrown out. Like the FDA needs that, right? And so I think news and consumption needs that, especially like it's really interesting, like this like rage bait stuff that we see all the time. It's unhealthy to like be this angry all the time, I think, and people get addicted to that. And and there's all this research, like you get angry 50 times a day or this kind of stuff, like I think that causes like health damage and other problems for people, not just like voting crazy people into power, but I think it's like physically hurting people like over time, like having those chemicals released in your body consistently. And so like it like having companies and organizations that like use that emotional output in order to generate views and money is should be regulated to a degree. Like it's abusive, and so how do you and I think we're probably a decade away from that like actually be able to like happen. So what's going to happen in this decade, who the hell knows.
Very cool. So I want to ask you, we have, DeFi is not fully, what's the word, out like embraced by everybody yet. So I want to find out what the challenges remaining are in the DeFi sector and what we need to look out for in the next couple of years.
Right. I think one would be user experience, because it's pretty intimidating. It's pretty intimidating to go deeper into DeFi. And a lot of these projects who are building DeFi stuff, right? Like a part of it is actually they're posturing towards like investors and perhaps whales. So they try to kind of overcomplicate their products, right? They basically were creating a novel thing. But if you're kind of crypto native, you can basically kind of weed through the junk and the fluff. A lot of protocols are actually pretty clever and super well designed. So I'll give you an example. So Curve is actually something that we're also taking inspiration from. And it's like from the user interface, it's one of the most like intimidating user interfaces to play in. So imagine if you remember Windows 3.1 or 3.11 or DOS, imagine that's the combination, that's the look, right? That's the look that they basically wanted to pursue. But when you really try to understand the protocol, the design is very elegant. It's actually very elegant. It makes you actually, and it's very, and it's actually something that that would make you want to participate in. So I think that's one. I guess not really necessarily user experience, because my position there is that I think that DeFi should still have a certain skill level to use, or else you might lose your money. Right. So it basically weeds the, people. It's a skill check. I want people still to have a skill check. But I think making sure that like these mechanisms are actually, or the customer experience is much more straightforward. That's one. I think there's also interesting things being built around liquidity management, like super interesting, and across the different types of chains. I mean, restaking was basically one of the biggest narratives like early last year, and I think it's still, people are still building that out. And I think that DeFi right now as a narrative is not as strong as the AI narrative, right? But I think that it's definitely something that that will be built out over time, right? As all of the different sectors increase in economic value, the more money people make here on the crypto side, the more that they will actually want to figure out how to maximize yield or put their money to work. So it will be a natural kind of it will be naturally go back to focusing on DeFi innovations. Yeah.
The whole thing is to bring data, more data, better data, and there are some methods. There are the new methods, and there are the old school traditional methods, right? What remains some of the limitations and challenges with incorporating traditional methods of data, across applications through organizations, and how we solve them?
Yeah. So far, we've seen the way of bringing data is usually through Oracle networks. So you have a lot of those, right? And that's kind of V1 of bringing data from off-chain, particularly to on-chain. The way we see it is that oracles were the first step, but for what we're building for a policy layer, you also need this compute component that has to happen. And that's where we function as off-chain compute. And so in our case, for what Aethos is doing is you define a policy which may involve some off-chain information. And let's make this even more tangible, right? Like, because I realize that this has been a bit more abstract. I think let's say like one use case is on preventing money laundering, AML. You might be an application, let's say particularly one that's focusing in the real world asset space, or a use case in which you're saying, hey, we're really moving money here, and our users have concerns that their assets are going to be commingled with a sanctioned entity. Huge problem in traditional finance. It's also a problem in crypto as well. What we have here is you're using off-chain information, which is a sanctions list that are published by various government entities, for example. So you have those sanction lists. Those are static lists. But what you also need to think about is a flow of funds, because if I'm a sanctioned entity, I'm immediately going to hop my funds from that address to another one to avoid being on that sanctions list. And the US government doesn't update their list real time. So in this case, you have an off-chain information, but you're also incorporating on-chain dynamic flow of fund information to say, wait, is this new address, is it still part of that sanctioned entity? What's the level of risk of that? So you're incorporating on-chain as well as off-chain information. And in this case, that's a type of compute, because you're making a determination there. And then in our case, what Aethos does is our operators say, let's say an application puts in place a policy for AML, our operators say, you've defined certain parameters for what happens if this sanctioned entity on-chain moves funds from one address that's been flagged to another one. Should that new address be incorporated into what you guys see as basically a dynamic blacklist? The operators are going to run that computation and then say, hey, yes, based off of the policy you've set and the parameters you set for the growth criteria, this new address is also directly tied to that sanctioned entity. And so you don't want that one to also be, you want that one to be included in a blacklist. That's a compute. And the operators are making a decision and then issuing, in our case, basically a check, a signature saying that these addresses have, this is a dynamic blacklist of addresses and they're all associated to a sanctioned entity. So it's that type of computation that you're having that's incorporating off-chain information as well as dynamic flow of fund, real-time flow of fund information. That's kind of the world that you have over time, of that complexity of you're incorporating that off-chain information. And so far we've had just the off-chain information being brought on, but then you need to be able to do additional you have to be able to do more with it. And that's where we're going.
So for those politicians who say that crypto is only used for laundering money, how do you, what do you say to them? How effective has this been in the prevention of money laundering and laundering of sanctioned assets?
If something like Aethos is used for different applications, you're actually able to prevent that, is what we've really shown. You can show best effort of really being able to prevent it. Obviously, it's never 100%. 100% is very difficult, and so I'm not going to say that you can 100% stop all of it, but you can actually stop it to a meaningful level for different applications. Again, we would say that this should never be incorporated really on a true layer. Like, it shouldn't be used at a layer 1, because layer 1 blockchain should be credibly neutral. And there's a number of things that should be credibly neutral. But in our case, different applications that need it because of what they're building can, of course, incorporate Aethos to have an AML type of policy.
At a high level, what are the major issues? You said fraud, you said waste. What are the major issues there, and how are you tackling them?
Yeah, so the major issues ultimately, if you look at them one by one, so within fraud, about 5% of a transaction is lost due to fraud. Fraud also causes settlement times to be delayed, but ultimately $140 billion in daily disputes. And the average settlement time currently for those shipments and those invoices is 45 days. The reason that exists is because there's no ledger, there's no blockchain that can prove I picked up this shipment at this date and time. I did what I said I was going to do. And therefore you should pay me what we agreed to at the beginning. And so a lot of times what happens is, different things get stuffed into the invoice where, oh, now all of a sudden I'm adding this different fuel surcharge than what we agreed to, or I'm adding this fee, or I'm adding that fee, or I'm removing this fee, removing that fee. But when that's in a smart contract, there's no dispute on what we agreed to because it's in code. It's literally on chain. And so when you look at it from that perspective, just the invoice reconciliation and payments piece, streamlining that process is going to reduce a lot of the, fraudulent invoices that ultimately increase the settlement times and hold up these payments in dispute. So that's one piece of fraud. You also have fraud that's used to facilitate theft. One of the big things happening in the logistics industry right now is you have this process where thieves are going out and they're buying different MC numbers. They're ultimately creating these fraudulent companies and then using those companies to intercept shipments and steal, a truckload of TVs or gold or whatever it is. And so they're pulling off these heists. And in the last year alone, there was a 430% increase in this type of theft where they were stealing the carrier's identity or they were stealing the broker's identity, and they were going in and stealing shipments ultimately, which in the United States is $35 billion problem annually. So those two things are very big, from a risk perspective. Those are big issues, right? But then you have more benign things like errors, where you have multiple systems. Those multiple systems have different data, and somebody over here accidentally pressed the wrong key, or this software wasn't using address validation, and so now we have two different addresses, same location, but two different addresses. So then when a driver goes out, oh, I was sent to the wrong location. I need to turn around. I need to go drive this new location, or there was an error on the shipment. It was 6 pallets, not 5, or it was 1,200 pounds, not 1,500 pounds, or even the other way around. And so that also creates a lot of the invoices. It creates a lot of the invoice disputes and billing issues, billing errors. But you also have all those coordination errors that are happening along the way. And again, the primary reason this problem exists is because you have all these different systems that are used by all these different parties, and you may have multiple carriers working with the same shipment to go from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E. And so that coordination is very expensive. It's very inefficient. And ultimately, 20% of the costs associated with the coordination of that shipment, the back office costs, are ultimately spent on trying to find the right information. So through email, through text, through phone call, how do I find the right information so I can properly coordinate that shipment? And so that's ultimately, the life of a freight broker and a freight forwarder, which play a pivotal role in this industry. Their job is going back and forth between the shipper and the carrier, collecting information from both so that they can properly coordinate that shipment.
We do have a major issue, and I've had a lot of shows on this, of MEV, getting front run by bots and paying extra spread. That is a problem. How do we solve it? You have an idea how that could be permanently solved? Because
Yeah,
a lot of projects
it's
try.
easily solved. Easily solved. It just requires will to do it. The problem that we have is the motivations as to why people are using DeFi in the first place. Now, there's 3 reasons that you should be using DeFi. One of them doesn't really exist yet, but it's going to be the one that matters. And that is disintermediate rent seekers and therefore make more money. That's true in the yield seeking space. Aave does a better job and did a better job and survived everything when the others, whether it was Celsius or Voyager or whatever, went kerflooey. It did a great job. But there are 2 other reasons people use DeFi to trade. They use DeFi to trade because they want to keep custody of their own assets. That's a valid reason, a very important one. The other reason is to avoid government scrutiny. And that one is interesting because if you're trying to avoid taxes or get around KYC because you're the Lazarus group, that's probably a reason that the governments of the world, when they finally get around to cooperating, they're going to stop both of those in their tracks. Doesn't mean DeFi is going to die. If actually it means it's going to flourish. Because what will happen is once there's no need, or once you push people who are trying to avoid taxation and avoid KYC to the periphery, the rise of DeFi markets that actually have order books that are deterministic, and there are some. I mean, Arbitrum is deterministic, even if Ether is not. When you get deterministic order books, what that means is the whole MEV, snipe botting, front running will either go away or it could be regulated / overseen. So you could treat people doing that as committing fraud, which is true, by the way, and not just in financial markets, right? It's like there's a hot concert and you figure out how to exploit the system to buy up tickets and push the price up and then sell it to unsuspecting people. There are laws against that, right? So it's not just in crypto, and people kind of want that because the average person doesn't like being taken advantage of. But the truth is, as long as the potential gains are in the orders of magnitude, people will put up with percentage points of being scalped. When the potential gain drops down to 1, 2 to 5 times on average, then people may put up with basis points being scalped. When the potential gains are in the percentages, then people don't put up with any being scalped. And so it really depends upon the potential of the market and what people put up with. The markets will correct eventually, and this is a solved problem. You will see there are multiple, and I'm not going to name them, but I know of them. There are multiple nascent exchanges that are hybrids, which allow people to keep custody of their own assets at the same time trading in, we'll call it a central book that is being monitored, and there is no MEV and no front running. And so, yeah, there are ways to solve this, but the industry has to want to solve it. The industry won't want to solve it until the potential gains get to a point where where they start thinking it's meaningful. And also when the governments start really pushing against the two things they care about. Governments care about two things. I say this all the time, Jamil. They care about getting their taxes, and they care about catching the bad guys and preventing the bad guys from doing bad things. That's what they care about. Now, some governments and some people want to do a lot more. Not me. I'm pretty libertarian, and I'm not sure that I like either I'm not sure I like the whole taxation idea on capital gains, particularly when you're buying and selling an asset that you're really trying to hold to mitigate the effect of currency debasement. It feels like it turns inflation into a tax at that point, to an actual tax as opposed to a stealth tax. But philosophy aside, I think that's the issue. The issue is markets will evolve, and there's a place and a time and a place for governments to be involved, but generally less than they are involved in the traditional markets, where it's overly prescriptive in almost every single jurisdiction.